Hey guys, Brandon Kowalas here, Director of the Salt Lake Community College Concurrent Enrollment Program. And today in this episode, we're going to be diving into our admission and our registration processes. I'm going to walk you through those all the way from beginning to end. Now, I want to preface this with saying that our process has not necessarily been the most beautiful thing. Our students for the last, it's been a long time since they've been registering themselves, but what we've noticed over the last year as we've engaged in a lot of process improvement is that every high school seemed to do things a little differently and on a little different timeline. Or sometimes they would do things majorly differently. And that's two lees in a row. If you're watching this and you're an English person, please don't turn us off because of the abomination that I just did in using lees twice. Okay. Anyway, so we realized that everybody was doing things a bit different. And when that happens, when everybody's doing a certain step at a certain time, so one person does it in, let's say, February, somebody else does it in June, somebody else does it in October, then how do we know when to send out prompts to do certain things, reminders, resources? How do we, when everybody's giving different information in different ways, how do we ensure consistency that students are getting certain information? So we looked at that, and there were I actually had one of the districts come to me and they said, we've about had it up to here with some of these processes, and we need to see them improved because our load is just so heavy, it's getting out of control. And so we sat down and we said, I think it's time that we look at our student admission and registration processes. So what we ended up doing is I went out personally into one high school for every district, and I walked through their admission and registration process, physically observed them doing it, and took notes, and then later went back and put together a process map. So we sort of mapped out, I tried the best I could to say, here's 5 different districts doing 5 different things, but yet they all have certain things in common, and trying to pull those out, put them together into a single process map. And then after that, we brought everybody together and said, here's what I've created. Let's walk through this together and we'll make some tweaks and modifications so that you can all agree that this process map accurately reflects generally what it is you're doing. So we sat down, we put the process map together, we went through it, we spent a few hours kind of tweaking it and modifying it, and then in the end we came out and said, this is what we all agree this process should look like. Once that happened, now we can look at the map and say, okay, there's a problem right here at this step. So if everybody's doing the same thing, let's bring our brains together and say, how do we fix this problem? What do we need to develop for you? What do we need to change? What do we need to do? And what can you all do? Maybe, Murray's got a fantastic idea for addressing this that everybody else didn't know about. So the more you can create a consistent process, the more you can collaborate and innovate and provide better resources for your partners. So that was the step that we went through to create the process map that I'm about to show you and walk you through so you understand sort of how we operate when it comes to admissions and registration. And like in all of the videos you've seen up to this point, this is a snapshot of right now. I'm sure that a month or a year or 2 years from now, this is going to be vastly different as we continue to improve and to grow. So hopefully it'll give you some ideas as we go through it for how you can potentially manage some of either all of your admission and registration processes or just little bits and pieces here and there. With that said, let's go ahead and dive in now to the process map, and I'll show you how that works. I'll even take you over to our website as we talk about those steps of the process. So let's go ahead and dive over into that. So this all typically begins when in the high school a presentation is delivered to students and or parents. And this presentation could include after-school meetings, it could include a classroom presentation, it could include individual and small group meetings. It could be all those different flavors, and it could be delivered by a number of different people. But the bottom line is there is a presentation delivered to students that sparks their interest in concurrent enrollment so that they want more or they want to participate in the program. Once that happens, a packet is typically distributed. Now, this packet is so variable right now at all of the different schools. But one of the things we've talked about is what are the core components and what can Salt Lake Community College develop for you that will sort of give you the resources that you need with accurate information so that everybody's delivering sort of a similar or if not the same packet. So a packet is distributed, and within that packet, the student receives a list of concurrent enrollment classes that are offered at the school. That typically happens. That's a list of the classes, the high school classes before they're actually concurrent. So here's what we're planning on offering. So they get that list, and then the student reviews the course list, and then they might select their class. So they look through that and say, well, I want to take these 8 classes for my 8 periods. Next, the student receives a high school course request information. And once they do that, then the student completes the course request sheet or arena scheduling, that's an electronic scheduling system they use, to declare their course interest for the upcoming year. And then the student returns the class request sheet to the high school. Whether that's electronic, it's done automatically, or if it's a paper, they return that. So now the high school has an idea of where's the interest out there. They haven't quite shaped their board yet. They haven't mapped out exactly what classes they're offering when. They're just trying to gauge how many sections of each class do we need based on student interest. After that, the student receives the SLCC admissions instruction, and they're invited to go complete SLCC admissions. So the student applies for admission to Salt Lake Community College. And in just a second, I'm going to jump back to this. But then the student receives some general concurrent enrollment information sheets, just so they're aware, what's this program about? What are some things that you need to know about concurrent enrollment? Now let me jump over here. I'm going to jump onto our website and show you where a student applies for admission. So here on our landing page for our concurrent enrollment website, we've intentionally made this very student-friendly, and we've focused on the core processes, the most important processes the student needs to engage in order to participate in concurrent enrollment. So you'll see right on the front, we've got admissions. This is only once. You only do this one time and then you're done. Registration is each semester and paid tuition. If they do those 3 things, then they will get college credit. So the student clicks on the admission link. There's a bunch of information about what they need to know before they apply. And then as they scroll down, there is the link for the admission application. They click on the admission application, and this takes them to the college's admission application. So the concurrent students use this, the regular students use this, the veteran students use this. All students use this application. They go through, they apply for admission, and they get admitted to the college, and everything is beautiful. So that's the admissions process. Let's now go ahead and jump over here and continue through the process map. Now, these first steps here typically occur back in February when the presentation is delivered. During March through April, so the student is selecting their courses, they're returning the sheet, they're applying for admission. That's happening sometime between March and April for most schools. There are some that do it totally off this, but this is generally what happens. So the student then returns the class request sheet to the high school, and the high school, and I'm going to scroll over here, this is the high school concurrent coordinator track. So these are all the steps the coordinator does. Up here are all of the steps that the student does. So the coordinator then generates a list of students, or someone at the high school generates a list of students requesting the concurrent enrollment classes. And then they check the SLCC admission status by checking their student information system. This is the high school student information system, and or they may check MyCE. And then at that point, they ask a question. Is the student admitted to Salt Lake Community College? If they are not, or let's say if they are, then an S number is added to the student information system, or they have an Excel tracking sheet that they use and they add that too. If they are not, then the student is added to a follow-up list, and then the student is provided instructions for completing admissions. And then it comes back over here to whether or not the student completes the task, and we'll get to that in a minute. So next, they check the student class status. Does the student meet the class status prerequisites? In other words, some classes are available only to seniors, some are available to juniors and seniors, some to sophomores, juniors, and seniors, so they check to see if the student meets that requirement. If they don't, then they're simply dropped from the class because that is a college requirement, and if they don't qualify, then they can't do it. We continue down, and they check the student high school GPA. Does the student have a 3.0 GPA? If they do, everything's wonderful, and they continue on. If not, then they consider alternate criteria. Is the student interested in taking, say, an automotive class, and they really shine in automotive, maybe not so much academically elsewhere, but they want to take this automotive concurrent class and the teacher recommends it? we'll then put them in, even though they maybe have a 2.0 GPA. So we look at some of those other factors and decide whether or not to put them in. If those alternative criteria are not met, then the student is dropped from the class. If they are, then we continue on checking the student's prerequisites. So then we do a prerequisite status. So we want to make sure they have qualifying scores if the class that they're taking requires a prerequisite test score. So we check that, and if no, then we ask, well, can the student then obtain those scores by testing? If they can't, they're dropped out of the class. If they can, then they provide the student information about how to complete the testing process. And then we come back up here, whether the student completes it or not is up to them. If they do have qualifying scores, then we take a look to see if those scores appear in our MyCE system. And if they do, then that is fantastic, and the student is allowed to stay in the class on the course request list. If they don't, then the question is, are scores listed on the high school transcript? If they are, then they submit those through MyCE. We get those entered into our system. If they're not, then the student is provided instructions to transfer their ACT scores or to complete the SLCC placement. So all this is occurring before the student has even registered. So we come back up here, all that stuff is, if the student has not completed it, is sent over to the student's realm, and then the question is, do they complete it? If they don't, they're dropped, and if they do, we come down here and they're allowed to stay in the class. So now we move over to, let's see what this is. This is the high school schedule finalization. So this happens between May and August for most schools. The high schools go through a process of finalizing their boards, basically their schedules for the year. So they map out, which classes they're going to offer when, and then a trackable class list is generated by the coordinator that they're going to use so they can monitor the students that are registered in that class. So now we're going to dive into, let's see when this track is. This is registration beginning between August and September. So we've now moved past the admissions and the vetting process, and we're now in registration. So in registration, the pre-registration teacher meeting is held where the coordinator may sit down with the instructors and talk about how can they partner together so that they can work to ensure that all the students get registered, because it is the student's responsibility to register themselves. So during this step, the students are given information as well it's basically instruction packets on how to go home and how to register themselves. Also, there may be times when they bring those Chromebooks into class and the students all sit down and they walk them through step by step how to register for that specific class. Now, you may ask, what kind of system do they use to register? Concurrent enrollment students at Salt Lake Community College use the exact same registration system as traditional adult college students. They all log into their My SLCC account, that's their student portal, and they go into the banner registration system and they type in the CRN that we give them, the course reference number, and they register for the class. So it is no different than what they would do after they matriculate. And we do that intentionally because we want them to learn that so that when they then transition, they know how to register themselves using the college's system. So if they come to us, it's just going to be a smooth, seamless transition. So they use the same system. It's identical. And I'll just show you really quickly sort of where they access that. So back here on the college's website, the student would go to My SLCC, they would click here, they would type in their account information, sign in, and then they'd go ahead and register. Now, I'll show you one other thing here really quick as well. So here on our website, if we go down to the student guide and we go into My SLCC, there's a whole list of tutorials that walk them through step by step how to do all of those processes. And these are often distributed to the students so that they know how to register themselves. Okay, so as they are then going about registration, the class roster with the student admission and registration information is distributed to the instructors so they can see who has registered and who's good to go, who has errors, and just a bunch of other information that the instructor can use and the coordinators can use to sort of track what's going on, because they see in real time through our MyCE system, not necessarily real time, it's like a 24-hour delay, whether or not the student has been registered in the class. So they track that on a daily basis and can watch them appear there in their MyCE account and can compare their high school roll. So the list is checked every day to monitor any changes and updates, and then they ask these questions. Does the student appear in MyCE? If they don't, then they remind the student to complete admissions. Hey, you need to go complete admissions because you're not even in the system. We're not talking the class roll, but I try to search you in MyCE and you're not even there. So you need to go out and you need to apply for admissions because you haven't done that yet. And if you're not admitted, you can't get registered. If they have done it, then they ask, does the student have a hold that the student can resolve? If the answer is yes, then the coordinator provides instructions for the student to go resolve the hold on their own. Again, teaching them to fish instead of fishing for them. So here's what you need to do. Here's who you need to talk to. Here's who you need to call. Now go do it. This is a skill you're going to need to learn when you're in college. So go do it. If they have a hold that the student cannot resolve, then the question is, does the student have a hold the coordinator must resolve? If the answer is no, then the coordinator calls the concurrent enrollment office and says, I've got this issue, can you help me work it out? And we work it out together. If they have a hold that the coordinator must resolve, then they'll use our MyCE system and documentation is compiled and the MyCE support request is submitted. Once that's submitted, I'm not going to go through all of this here, but we walk down into the coordinator part. This is our internal office track here, I think. Let's scroll over. Yep, this SLCC, Concurrent Enrollment Specialist. So these are all the steps that they walk through in order to resolve the hold that is on the student account. So again, this is an internal process. It's going to be very unique to us, so I'm not going to take the time to review that with you. But let's go back up here. Let's see. So they go ahead and they submit the documentation through the support request system in MyCE, in our Canusha system. And then they go and they monitor that on a daily basis to see whether it's resolved. Because there in MyCE, they can see a list of all of the support requests they've submitted with student issues. And whenever we resolve it, we mark it as resolved. If it needs more information, so let's jump back here to the process map. If at some point it says, hey, we need you to upload a high school transcript, or we're missing the GPA, or we're missing some other information, if that's the case, they add the information, it goes back down through the internal office process, and then when it finally is complete, the student is notified and said, hey, you know what, that issue that you were having, it's taken care of. Go and get yourself registered. So you should be clean and clear now to go get that taken care of, and they can go get registered. So the student is notified. We come over here. Now it ends up in the student's court. So we ask, does the student complete the task? If yes, they're done, they're registered, they're ready to rock and roll. Everybody rejoices. It's fantastic. If not, then we say, well, did the student forget? Yeah, if they forgot, then let's come down. We're going to follow this all the way down to the teacher track. This is the teacher's responsibility. So the instructor then reminds the student to complete registration and checks college roll. So again, the instructor should be checking on a regular basis the college roll and the high school roll to make sure those match. If they don't, then the instructor is hounding the student. You need to go home and you need to take care of this, because if not, as soon as that deadline hits, you're dropped out of the class and you're going to have to be moved somewhere else. So get it taken care of. If once the student appears on the college roll, the process is complete, everything is wonderful. If not, then the instructor continues to remind the student if they encounter problems, or if they don't encounter problems, they just keep reminding them. And you all know how high school teenagers are. Sometimes it's necessary. If they do, however, encounter problems at any point, then the instructor notifies the concurrent enrollment coordinator, and we jump back up into this process where they go through to check to see what the problem is, submit that through the support ticket system, and it continues on until it's resolved. So we jump back up here. Did the student forget? If they did not forget, did they encounter problems? If they didn't, then eventually the student is a slacker and they're dropped from the class. And hopefully they also are dropped with a conversation about, what did you learn from this experience of not meeting deadlines? What are you going to do next time to ensure this doesn't happen? If they did encounter problems, then again, the student informs the coordinator and the instructor, and it continues looping through until it's resolved and the student takes care of the registration and everything is good to go. And that is our student admission and registration process. Now, again, like as we've gone through this, we all function differently. We all have different processes. We all have different systems for handling things. But if nothing else, what I would invite you to do is try to ensure as much consistency as possible in these processes at all of your high schools. And the only way that that is going to happen is if you regularly and actively involve them in process improvement. Because if they're not involved, if you just say, this is what we're going to do because this is what we think is going to work, then you're going to have some high schools that say, but it won't work at my school, and why are you dictating this to me, and I'm going to be a stickler. So as much as possible, get people involved when you're hashing out these processes. Allow them to share, allow them to learn, allow them to share with each other best practices and see what everybody's doing in order to navigate some of the challenges that they're facing. As you do that, and as you create consistency in your process, it'll become so much easier for you to develop resources and materials and tools for them that matter. It'll be so much easier to solve problems, because if somebody runs into a problem out there, you've got a whole community that are all involved in the same process that are going to be able to have ideas to share. And it's just going to be, better overall for improving and growing and creating, a greater unity among you and all of the high schools. But anyway, this is our registration process. Hopefully it's given you some ideas of some things that you can do, either small or big. And until the next episode, remember again that nothing is impossible if you are resourceful, if you think outside the box that sometimes we get stuck in, and last of all, if you have the courage to act.